Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Cut the Small Talk. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to everyone that continues to listen to this podcast. This podcast has brought me so much joy, and it's really helped me get through some dark times in my life. And I see that we have some new listeners, a lot from the UK and Thailand. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and thank you to anyone else that's new to the pod. I'm excited to say that this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Therapy has personally helped me a lot in the last 2 years. I've gone through some really difficult things, and whereas in the past it used to take me forever to get through hard things, therapy has really taught me realistic and healthy ways to move through the difficult moments in my life. I think there's a misconception about therapy that it really should only be for people that go through really, really tough situations in life, but I think that we can all benefit from therapy because we all go through tough things, and we all deserve more happy moments in our lives. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that has options like video, phone, and even live chat sessions with a therapist, so you don't have to get out of your pajamas or leave your house, which is definitely a plus for a lot of people, including myself. It's also much more affordable than in-person therapy because therapy can cost a lot, which we talk about in this episode. And you can also start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours, which I know is also a difficult thing with scheduling therapists. It's hard to find someone that has availability, so BetterHelp is really great with that. So again, this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Cut the Small Talk listeners can actually get 10% off their first month, and I will share my referral code with you guys at the end of this episode, so stick around. I also wanted to give you guys a heads up that this was recorded live at a cafe, so there is background noise, but I did my best to reduce that as much as possible, so please bear with me. With that being said, I'm super excited to share this next episode with you because in this episode, I talked to an awesome new friend and mental health professional, Carly Pirro. Carly is a licensed social worker who has a passion for working with adult populations, especially those with co-occurring medical and psychiatric disorders. Carly got her degree at Columbia University in New York City, where she started her career, and she now lives and works up here in Massachusetts. Here is her story. I guess to start off the discussion, something that has fascinated me as an adult is learning how much our childhood really affects who we are as an adult. So I'd love to know a little bit about baby Carly. Or what were you like as a child?
Who is she? So I guess to give you a little background, I grew up in kind of two different places, which is confusing in itself. I lived in Danbury, Connecticut, but my dad was a band teacher in a school district in Chappaqua, New York, which is a very affluent town right outside of New York City. So I actually commuted to middle school and high school, which means I was always kind of a little out of the circle, just because I didn't live in this very small town where everyone lived right there. I was actually very shy when I was younger.
Oh, really?
Yes. I used to get such bad social anxiety. I would walk into the cafeteria and feel nervous just because there were so many people that I thought were looking at me.
Oh my God.
I was very shy, and I don't know, at some point I grew out of it, but as a kid, let's see, my parents are divorced, so talk about things that, affect you as an adult. They got divorced when I was 8, and that was really tough, having both parents who were single and dating, and you're going into your teenage years. It's, being a teenager is hard enough already. So, that was definitely tough. I struggled with my own kind of beginnings of anxiety and depression around that time. Both my parents have struggled with those things too. So I think growing up, we were actually pretty open about our feelings just because of everything that was going on. We had to be.
Yeah.
So I do think that kind of informed why I wanted to go into this field, or contributed to some of the skills that I have and why I'm good at being a social worker. I guess in high school, I I was a chorus nerd. I was in like every chorus under the sun. I was in normal chorus, magical choir, which is like very nerdy. Oh yeah, like medieval music. Very nerdy. We wore these horrible long gowns that were so hot. No, but I was kind of in the background in high school. Like I knew some of the like quote unquote popular kids, but I really hung out with a lot of like the theater and band people.
Okay.
As you know, I was in a cappella in college. UVM Cats Meow, shout out. We have an album on Spotify, so check us out.
Wait, Loki, what? You have an album on Spotify?
Yes, it's called Out of the Bag. Check us out. And then, in college, I studied psychology like everyone else, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. I just knew that I wanted to kind of figure people out, and also like looking back, I'm realizing figure myself out, because like I was struggling with a lot myself, and I just wanted to know more and figure it out. But through that, I also have developed the ability to empathize with people and kind of understand where people are coming from. Sometimes we do things that don't seem to make sense or act in ways that we don't want to, but usually if you dig a little deeper, there is a reason that is understandable.
Yeah.
And then I moved to New York City. I had just gotten out of a relationship and was like really like bummed, and that was like, I'm gonna like do the thing and move to New York City like people do. And I actually lived there for 4 years. For the first couple years I lived there, I worked at NYU in cardiology research, actually, which has nothing to do with anything I do now, but it was still very interesting. And then I kind of decided, I really do want to be in mental health. I tried to go away from it, and I'm kind of feeling called back to it. So I applied to a bunch of social work schools. I got into Columbia, and I went to Columbia, and then I graduated in the middle of the pandemic, and that's been a great time.
So how did you do like practical work?
Yeah, so the first year I was in, it wasn't the pandemic yet, so I was in person. I worked at interned at it wasn't a school, but it was almost like a vocational support place for younger people, so like 16 to 24, in the South Bronx. And I stuck out like a sore thumb there. I was like the only white person in a 3-mile radius, which we can get into later, but that's social work and race definitely have a big intersection that we can talk about. But and then my second year I interned at New York Presbyterian Hospital on a neurology floor, and then halfway through that, the pandemic happened.
Okay.
So we just stopped early, and I continued with my classes and online, and then I graduated, so it's kind of disjointed.
Yeah, there's a lot that I'm curious about with your, like, what you've shared about your background and everything. I think it's really interesting that you said that it was an open environment for like talking about feelings, because I think that's something that I'm not familiar with, and I know a lot of my friends have a similar experience to mine where you just don't talk about feelings, and I think any like sad or negative in quotes like feelings are too big to be brought up. So
I mean, it took work, but it did exist. Like if I was upset, like I had someone I turned to, like my parents. But at the same time, I think there's like two sides to that coin. I will be the first to admit that I don't want to say too emotional, but I can overshare about what I'm feeling, and sometimes people don't want to hear it. Sometimes I say something, I'm like, why did I say that? Like, sometimes it can be too much. So there's a time and a place to talk about your feelings. I need to learn how to, like, journal more or channel it elsewhere. But overall, yeah, it is nice to have a family where that's, I can talk about that. And my mom has had her fair share of experiences with depression and trauma, and so she really gets it. She's been through therapy. I've been through therapy. I'm currently in therapy. So, and also being in the social work field, me and my coworkers talk about these things a lot, very openly.
Oh,
yeah, it's at least in my current job. I can't speak for other environments, but it's a pretty open place to talk about what's going on in your life. Not constantly, but it wouldn't be unusual for someone to say, oh, I have to leave early because I have a psychiatrist appointment. You know, like
that's nice.
Almost just accepting it as like part of the rest of your health.
Yeah.
But obviously, so like I'm in the field, so I'm amongst a bunch of people who talk about this stuff all day. But I wish it was like that in other industries. But I know it's definitely not.
I think there is a little bit of a shift towards that.
I think so, and I think after the pandemic, we've just been shut inside and like forced to reflect on ourselves so much that I feel like there's been a lot of like. I know I'm just speaking from like my circle, but a lot of people have gone through like big internal shifts in like their views on the world or views about themselves. Wanting things to change, because I think we were just all forced to like sit with that stuff for 2 years or however long it's been at this point. And the increased isolation also has led to an increase or like a worsening of certain mental illnesses as well. And so those things in combination, I think we're kind of being like forced to look at it a little more head on than before, which I don't think is a bad thing. I mean, it's not a good thing that people are feeling worse, but I do think it's a good thing that people are looking at it a little bit more directly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Before we get into a little bit more about the stigma, would you say that mental health kind of came into your awareness as a person when you were young because you were able to talk about feelings and because of the experiences of your parents?
I think I was able to talk about them so young because I experienced a lot of emotional turmoil as a child.
Yeah.
I mean, like, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
I remember feeling really sad and like angry a lot as a kid, just because I think I felt that my living environment was very chaotic. Like, I was going back and forth, an hour and a half every weekend to see my mom, and I would have to, unfortunately, take on some of my mom's stuff that she was going through. She would talk to me about it, and even though I was way too young to be taking that on. And so I think I had to grow up emotionally faster at that age, and so I was going through a lot, and I, as a teenager, just was curious about all of it, and what are these things that I'm feeling? What are these things that I've experienced? I wanted to know. I've always been like, I need to know the why behind things. Like, I'm always on Wikipedia. It's weird. Like, I will go down Wikipedia black holes. I'll end up on the weirdest pages, but I just have to know the why. And so I think that was part of it, was like, I got into it because I'm like, why, what are these dynamics? Like, what happened? What happened there? And I've always just been a really sensitive person. Like, sometimes, for better or for worse. So I find that things affect me very deeply, but I think in my work that serves me well, because I can kind of understand people from a different perspective, on a deeper level. But I'm not perfect by any means. We can go into this later, but there's a kind of an assumption that people who work in mental health like have their shit figured out. Can I curse on here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I love it when people ask that.
Have their stuff. I'll say shit. Have their shit figured out, and like, we don't. Like, I can safely say, like, we don't. Just like everybody else. Like, I mess up, and I have a lot of stuff to work on myself. It's just something that I've noticed.
Yeah. I do wonder that, because I have friends that are therapists, and they seem like they just have their stuff together, but yeah, you're right, we're all human.
Yeah, and like, you never know what goes on behind closed doors. You don't know what's going on in someone's head.
Right.
As much as I try to work on those things, I still get very triggered by certain things. Act in ways that I'd rather not, and then feel regret later about acting that way. But I'm human, just like the rest of us. So, yeah.
From here, Carly and I started talking about mental health stigma and where we see it in the world around us.
And so it does exist. Actually, suicide, I believe, is a lot higher in men. I think partially because of that, because then again, this is very generally speaking, but men have socially been kind of trained to not talk about their emotions, not show their emotions, and So if you're just stuffing things down, it kind of starts to eat you up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I do see it. I'm trying to think of like the places that I see mental health stigma the most. I think definitely in men. Again, generally speaking, not all men, but societally. I think certain industries, I want to say, are less. You're not gonna talk. You don't typically see like successful businessmen speaking about their feelings, right? And I think that also gets back to like the macho kind of toxic masculine piece. I don't want to generalize to like cultural things because I'm like a white girl. I don't know enough to speak about each culture, but there are certain like cultural differences where like talk about your feelings is not a thing that happens in certain. I don't know. I mean, maybe you can speak more about like where you think you see mental health stigma the most.
I mean, I definitely see it in the workplace. Like I recall one experience where a hiring manager didn't want to bring someone onto a third interview because by that point they found that person met all the like qualifications for the job, but then they did like a social media peek, and on one of the posts for that person she was talking about anxiety. And so the hiring manager was like, why would somebody talk about their personal anxiety on such a public platform? Like, I don't want that person on my team.
Like, I'm sorry, but if you haven't experienced anxiety, then like you might be lying to yourself.
Yeah, it's a human.
It's a human reaction to being overstimulated, really. I mean, like, or stressed out, given too much to do, which happens a lot at work. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
We're complex people. We have so many things going on at once. We can't just like act like a robot in one environment and then save all the other stuff for home.
Yeah. And then, what happens when you can't not bring it to work?
Yeah.
We also discuss how difficult it can be to be real at your workplace about your mental health issues and everyday problems.
If something's going on that's really affecting you, taking time off of work for mental health concerns, like, not an option. I mean, at least in my workplace. I've called out because I've felt mentally unwell, but I don't say that it's because of, I'm like, oh, I'm sick, I have a fever. Right. I never say, like, I'm emotionally unwell and I have to take the day off.
Yeah.
And that's tough because there are days where you're like, whatever it is, whatever's happening in your life, maybe a family member's died, maybe you are struggling with your own mental illness and you're having a depressive episode and you're trying to get yourself back together or whatever it might be, like, it's really hard to work when you're going through those things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I remember, this was like a couple months ago, I was going through a lot, and I had called out like one day that week, and I just like the next day I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna go to work, like, and to go to work and do what I do, know. But I went in and I had supervision that day, which is where I meet with a person who has a higher license than me to like talk about cases and kind of get feedback. And my supervisor is great. He's always said, like, if something is happening in your life that is preventing you from doing your best work and you need to talk about it, like, you can always come to me with that. And I kind of felt weird about, I was like, I don't want to like bog it down. But like that day I was like, you know what, like, it is preventing me from doing my work. And so I brought it to him, and he was kind of just like, you don't have to be on 100% all the time. Like, do the bare minimum, turn your brain halfway off and just get through the days.
Wow.
And I was like just being given permission to do that rather than beating myself up about like, oh my God, I'm falling apart. I can't do anything right. I'm going to get fired. Like all the panic thoughts that are going through my head. And then just to be told like, no, you can do this. You can just be half there and get through it. And I did it, and eventually I started feeling better, and I got through it. But that's not an option for a lot of people to have that discussion, you know?
I think it's really admirable that he put that in place intentionally, because I could see how that'd be beneficial for so many people.
Yeah, and like I hope if I'm ever a supervisor, like I want to do that for the people that I'm supervising, you know, offer that up, because just the fact that it was on the table, you know, made me feel like I could go to him, not excessively, but like if I really needed it, I could go to him, and it was really helpful.
I love that you brought up that there's a stigma with men. A couple of my guy friends recently just posted something on social media about, it was a post that said like, I wish men talked more like mental health with each other. I wish men felt open to like cry more with each other.
It's easy to kind of like say, oh, women are just more emotional, men just aren't as emotional, and like I've definitely believed that, but like as time has gone on, I realized that's not actually the case. Men, again, generally speaking, have just been socialized to not like be as out there about it as some women feel like they can be. And yeah, I mean, I wish that it was seen as like a strength for men to talk about their feelings. Like, I think it's really hot. Like,
I was about to say, I get attracted.
Same. Like, if you can talk about your feelings, like, I'll be there. I will come through. And no, but it really is, because it's like vulnerability is sexy, and
absolutely,
like, you know, being shut down is not sexy, and not that you should do things just because they're sexy, but you know, it's
good for you.
I think it would benefit just generally, like, for men to have each other's back, and for it to be okay to talk about hard stuff, because men and women feel just as much as each other, and we should be able to talk about those things just as much with each other.
Absolutely.
Do you find that your friends who grew up in that environment, like as they've gotten older, that they've been able to talk about their feelings more, be more comfortable, as they've kind of gotten away from maybe their like family, kind of gone out on their own?
I can speak to like a few experiences with my friends, and I guess my own, but it hasn't been an easy transition. I think when we bring up that the way we think is different from our parents, our parents have found it to be like a point of conflict and a point of like disrespect almost. And anytime we bring it back to like, oh, you know, it was maybe the way you brought us up kind of negatively influenced some of the ways we think, it's like but what about all the other things that we did for you? What about the other things that we gave you in life? Like, why are you pinpointing those negative things?
Kind of bringing up the bad, and you could see how, you know, your parents might take that as, well, we gave you so much, we gave you life, we gave you X, Y, Z. It's hard to have those conversations. Because it's not that like you want to blame them, but kind of, I guess you are a little bit. But I mean, we all we are products of our parents, for better or for worse, and it's tough to talk about those things directly with them.
We also talk about one of my favorite things in the world, which is therapy. We talk about who can benefit from it and our personal experiences with it.
I personally think everyone can benefit from therapy, whether or not you're actively going through like a crisis, or, you know, I don't think you have to wait. You definitely don't have to wait to get to that point to seek out therapy, because we all have stuff, you know, and like you said, most of it's from our childhood. When you look at it really closely, you can trace it back to, you know, how you were raised, or things that happened to you kind of growing up. And I think it can be useful just to reflect on those things, reflect on your behaviors, your thought patterns, because there's always room for, you know, improvement, and we can get very stuck in our points of view, like how we look at situations. Like I can be I can be very negative about things, and I know that, and like sometimes it'll take someone on the outside to be like, hey, like, you're looking at this very negatively, like it doesn't have to you don't have, there are different ways to look at the same thing, and then like, oh, that's right. Like, why am I thinking this way? Like, so I think just in that sense, like, just being more content with yourself, like, I do think that therapy can be beneficial. And obviously, you know, if you are going through a mental health crisis, you're finding that you are exhibiting like real, you know, symptoms of something like anxiety, depression, or even something more extreme or severe like bipolar disorder, you know, definitely seek out help. But no, I do think that there is a place for everyone in therapy.
Yeah. Have you always had a positive experience with it?
No, I haven't. I love my therapist now. She's great. I've been in and out of therapy since I was like 18. So I've been, you know, so I've been to a few different therapists. Most of them have been great. There was one who was so bad. I was like, how did this man what's going on? So he was a psychiatrist, meaning he is his MD. He can prescribe medications, but he also had, I guess, training in like talk therapy, that kind of thing. So he did both, which was useful for me because I was on medications at the time, still am. And there's different like schools of thought in like how to be a therapist. But I guess this guy took the doing the minimum as his school of thought. So like I would like come in, I don't know, talk about whatever, sometimes be upset about something, and he would just sit there and stare at me. And then we just like sit in silence.
That's so awkward.
And then kind of just like, I just start like panic talking because I was like, well, so, like I just didn't know. And it actually got to the point where I tested it out. I was like, how long could we sit in silence for?
Oh my God.
So we got to a silent point and I just like sat there and we just like stared at each other.
What?
And it was so uncomfortable that I said, so are you going to say something now? And he goes, oh, well, usually I just listen. And I'm like, what? If I wanted to talk to a brick wall, I'd go find a brick wall and talk to it. Like, the whole point is to like get a different perspective in my point of view.
Yeah.
So that was not good for me. I don't know, maybe some people like that.
How long were you with this guy?
Not very long.
Okay.
I'd say maybe a month. I gave him a few tries and I was like, this isn't gonna work.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing with therapy is like, it's at the end of the day, it's two human beings sitting in a room with each other, or now telehealth. And if you don't get along, like if you don't vibe, if you know, for whatever reason, there's a lot of factors that make people click and not click. It's not going to work. So it's about finding that right fit too. And sometimes it's not a good fit. Sometimes it's a really good fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of my friends aren't trying to find therapists because they think it's going to take a really long time to find a good fit, which it may. But yeah, I wish there was a way to like find a better fit quicker, because I think that's really pushing some people away from it.
Yeah, definitely. And just in general, I mean, a lot of therapists are booked right now. I help people find therapists through my work as well, and it's tough, you know. I'm glad everyone's in therapy, that's great, but it also means if you really need it, it's hard to find. You know, the people that aren't hard to get in with are usually people that don't accept insurance and are very expensive, so there's the financial barrier too, which leads to, you know, the people that really need it and have pretty extreme, like, legitimate stressors in their life, like homelessness, like maybe domestic violence, or even, you know, their stressor is that they don't have enough money to get by, then they can't get the therapy that they would need to, you know, help them, and it's just a circle of, you know, not going anywhere.
Yeah. I definitely think about that a lot, just the affordability of mental health services.
Yeah, it's not affordable for the most part.
It's not.
No. And therapists, people in mental health, are notoriously underpaid. And so what happens is, you know, people get to the point where they can't open their own private practice and they're broke and they have all these loans and they're like, well, I need to make a living, so I I'm not going to accept a lot of insurances because it's going to cost me money.
Right.
And so, maybe another solution is to just pay people in the mental health field more, and then, they wouldn't have to do that. I don't know. I mean, I think it's becoming a little bit more accessible. You have things like BetterHelp, which I think is like, it's still pricey, but it's not as pricey as out-of-pocket private therapist that doesn't accept insurance. You have other things out there like therapymatcher.com, which is it's actually a group of social workers that help connect people to therapists, which is cool. Yeah, so check that out. And Talkspace, I think, is another one out there too. So, it's kind of opening up.
Aside from therapy, what are some ways that you like to instill like mental wellness into your life? I know you're a musician. I was wondering if that plays a role.
Definitely. Music's always been a great outlet for me. I grew up in a really musical household. My dad was a band teacher. He just retired last year. My mom is an amazing classical piano player, and so it's just always been in my life. It's what brings me comfort. I love singing. I love playing the piano. And I love playing music with friends, and even just listening to music. Music I think is really powerful. I think it channels feelings in a way that sometimes can't be channeled with words, and I think that's why I like it. Because sometimes there's feelings that feel so big or so indescribable that music serves as this way to actually express those things, and it also brings us together. I specifically think of love songs or heartbreak songs. If you listen to the song, you're like, oh my god, this is how I'm feeling. Yeah. This person, this brand, musician out there, there's someone else out there who has felt the way that I feel, and they get it. And everyone who's heard that song and related to that song gets it too. And so I think it really can bring people together. Yeah. Music's a really big one. Exercise is, I think, an incredible stress relief.
Exercise many times a week?
Kind of recently, not that many. I've been getting back into it in the last month or two. I'm probably at 3 times a week now, which is in there. But it's such a great mood booster because there's a physiological change, right? That releases hormones and neurotransmitters, and gives you energy. And so that's a big self-care thing, and it feels good to take care of my body. I've had a couple back surgeries in my life, so that's I'm always kind of nervous that something's going to come back. So if I go too long kind of neglecting my my physical fitness, I start to get worried about that. And in no way, shape, or form am I in incredible shape, but just being active in whatever that means. Even if it's just going for a long walk, moving my body. That's another big piece of self-care. Seeing people, family, friends, if I'm feeling down, just getting out of the house and being around people even if I'm not talking to them, walking into Davis Square where we're sitting right now and just kind of being out in the world is helpful. Yeah, and just generally, taking care of myself in the simplest ways that sometimes slip when things are going wrong, like showering every day and, not looking like a gremlin, actually taking care of myself and eating good food and, eating a vegetable every now and then. Those are my self-care techniques.
Awesome. Those are good ones. We talked about the most challenging parts of your job. I don't know if you wanted to expand.
I think I talked a little bit about how a lot of people are, just the lack of resources out there.
Yeah.
Another challenging thing, I do see a lot of death at my job.
You do?
Yeah. And, it's always weird to talk to people about because unless you work in the medical field or, something adjacent, it's kind of weird to be talking about death.
Yeah, to me that sounds like I wouldn't be able to go on for the day if I...
It's tough. You're in a hospital, so that people are either there to get better or to die ultimately. So there is that knowledge working in that specific environment. Not all social workers deal with death, depending on what environment you're in, but in a hospital it does come up, and that's been really tough. So yeah, that's a big challenge, that piece. But it's also like, what a unique opportunity to be able to like help support someone in like the last days that they're alive on this planet, and like talking about everything that they've wanted to say. You know, because we get to the end of our life and there's certain things that we never said to people that we finally want to say, you know, things like that, and getting to talk to those people about those things. And that's a really unique experience that like not many people have, to get to help people through that time in their life and just be with them, because it's, I can imagine, very scary, but it's not as scary if you're not alone. You know, I've learned so much about myself through this work, and about people. Like, people are, I think the biggest thing that I've learned is like, people are good. Like, people just want to be loved and accepted, and people are good for the most part. I mean, you know, there's exceptions, but sometimes we act in ways that aren't good. But I think at the core, like, people are good, you know, people want to just be loved and accepted. And yeah, it's been a cool realization, because sometimes it doesn't feel like that.
Yeah. I think that's a nice place to end.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, good. Thank you for having this conversation with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun.
And that's a wrap. Isn't Carly cool, guys? If you want to find Carly and connect with her, you can find her on LinkedIn or message her on Instagram. I've linked her socials to the show notes, so definitely check them out. She's also a crazy good singer, so that's another reason to follow her. And again, this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Cut the Small Talk listeners can get 10% off their first month of BetterHelp by going to betterhelp.com/cutthesmalltalk. That's betterhelp.com/cutthesmalltalk. And I'll leave a link in the show notes. And that's about it, guys. I hope you have a great rest of your week and weekend. And until next time, happy connecting. Bye.